Guys, I have a confession to make. Despite being a tiny nipped Sony soy boy shill beta gamer who acts like he can taste the sky and smell sunshine whenever a new Sony first party game comes out, throwing it onto my list of 10 favorite games of all time right next to like 8 other games from this studio, I don't have the best relationship with one of their newer darling IPs, Horizon. To say that I hate Horizon Zero Dawn like the title says is a bit of an overstatement, but I definitely find it boring and unfulfilling for reasons that I'll get into later in this video. I gave this game 3 goes over the years since its release, and all 3 times I found myself never feeling motivated to pick up the controller and continue after like the 6 to 7 hour mark. Even the time that I told myself that I was gonna force my way through it, I just kept pushing back my next play session in favor of other stuff over and over till I just abandoned it again. And I know what you're gonna say if you like this game. I know, it gets better after the first 10 hours. I'm sure it does. But I found nothing substantial to hang on to in those early hours to keep me going, nothing that instilled confidence that something great was ahead. And I'm not the biggest RPG guy anyways, so for all I knew, it was never gonna pan out for me. Plus, I mean, if you make a game that's 30 hours long and the first 10 hours are boring, I think this is an unavoidable result. That's not even a diss on the game or the fans of it, but like, there's gonna be a chunk of players that just don't get the hype. I wanted to make this video because I'm aware that I'm not alone in my opinion on this game. Not just not enjoying it, any game will have a group of people that don't enjoy it, but I've seen the love for this title, I've seen the potential in its world and its premise, I recognize how beautiful it is, and I wanna like it, I just don't. And I know a lot of people feel the same way. So the question is, does Horizon Forbidden West fall into the same trappings? It does have some great review scores, but that doesn't really help somebody like me because the same people gave Zero Dawn great reviews, so what matters is, did it address the things that made it so hard for a particular group to enjoy the first game? I'm gonna try and give a breakdown of just that, what it improved on in its earlier hours and in general from last time, what missteps it fails to address that bugged me from the first game, and whether the grass is really greener if you can push past a certain point. And don't worry, all the footage or minor details that I expand on will be from either the opening sections of the game prior to your actual foray into the Forbidden West, or from the trailers that have released so far. Let's start with the most important thing first. They made Aloy look more manly in this game, and they gave her a beard, which is gross, but they did integrate a welcome new bust-down mechanic so that she can maintain her femininity, thank God. But come on, Sony, her ass looks like a piece of plywood. Why would I even— Okay, sorry, I couldn't help myself. Actual breakdown now. I want to start with the improvements that I noticed early on in Forbidden West, which continue throughout the title. They are just general improvements, but they were responsible for pushing me through the early slog that always defeated me in the last game, so I want to highlight them in their own section. Unlike Zero Dawn, Forbidden West doesn't seem like it's hoarding all the best-looking areas for later on this time around. We're immediately shown more diverse, luscious, dense, and intricate areas. These tutorial locations are bigger and feature amazing landscapes. It already feels like a world that you want to explore. And while there are more impressive looking sections of the map as you go along, this is nothing to turn your nose at. Horizon Zero Dawn was beautiful, and I've seen parts of that game which look so good, but lots of its early sections were a lot more basic, a lot more barren, and it was like the game was hiding its best cards for hours, which just isn't fun for the beginning. That's really not a problem with Forbidden West. This game looks amazing the second that you boot it up. The general tutorialization of everything is also more dynamic. The last game felt like it rolled out its tutorials very slowly and in some painfully boring ways, but here, even though the game isn't nearly as interesting as it will be in the future, it doesn't drag its feet. It wasn't a hoot of a time going through the motions of, alright, this is how you track enemies, here's some ways you can take them out, blah blah blah, but it was definitely an improvement here. And there were moments in between the more stiff tutorials that were pretty fun. They let you loose a bit or gave you a cool set piece here and there. Since this time around we don't have to worry about crafting Aloy's origins or how she becomes the deadly warrior that she does, we're able to fight at a high level immediately, and that's very welcome. From the moment you first get control of Aloy to the moment that you fight your first robot, I don't think that more than 5 minutes passed, and the first enemy doesn't play around. Listen, there's way more advanced and tough enemy types that you'll discover, and these things are pretty easy to handle even like 2 hours in, but objectively speaking, this is a pretty sophisticated first enemy. It shows off Geurilla's incredibly detailed and mesmerizing robot designs and movements, it closes in on you really quick, it hits really hard, it has a rapid sonic boom attack, you're into the action very quick in this game. Combat all around also just feels better here. It's a series of small improvements with how the bow feels, having more in-depth targeting and elemental based mechanics, and better melee. Nothing's overhauled, but it's much snappier and more satisfying. Although I do have to say that melee doesn't feel as good as I thought it might after seeing the promo for the game. Even after I upgraded stuff, it was middlingly fun. The DualSense works wonders in this game on PS5 and is a big part of the combat combat feeling better early on. I have a tiny bit to say about the less fun parts of combat in the next section, but the haptics and triggers help with the punchiness of ranged attacks and the fun of traversal. Speaking of traversal, it's enjoyable enough and super cinematic, but it's also a bit limited. It feels like a lot more things should have been scalable, and the speed of climbing should have been bumped up. In the open world, climbing just feels way less fluid than you'd want. Animation transitions take way too long even though they're very well made, and moments like handholds falling off or Aloy barely hanging on and needing to get her bearings are a lot less charming here than something like Uncharted, cause like, this is a 30 to 80 hour open world game. If I'm climbing, I just want to get from point A to point B. I don't really need it to be this extra. Mechanically, it's nothing special, but as a spectacle, especially in linearly designed areas, it's pretty perfect. From both the perspective of handhold placements that call for a lot of dancing and prancing and swinging from Aloy, as well as just an excuse to clamber up rustic buildings with a gorgeous backdrop. Okay, so that was a lot of the smaller stuff that improved the quality of life and early pacing, even though the pacing in the beginning is still a little bit too slow, but let's move on to some of the bigger improvements that really gave me hope for this game. The first boss is just amazing. The design is superb. It's so good it's got me out here saying the word superb like I'm some kind of 87-year-old man. The way it slithers around while it hisses with its mechanical hinges opening up as it does, I just feel entranced while watching it. More importantly though, it avoids feeling like a long, static, bogged down process unlike so many early bosses in Zero Dawn. A lot of the bosses in that game turn into endurance fights where you do an incredibly small amount of damage and hide behind stuff most of the time, made even worse by the fact that so many of these bosses are almost stationary, as are their weak points. I remember this being a major issue for me in Zero Dawn. I was going up against these conceptually unbelievable creatures that should be so fun to fight, but time and time again it was just an exercise of how long can you pump arrows into the same unmoving spot without getting sniped in the face. But even the first boss of Forbidden West encourages you to move around more because of the quick and vicious bites of the snake, the health isn't ludicrously high, and the weak points don't just stand still for you, they're tough to hit. The Slitherfang is constantly bobbing and weaving and repositioning. It feels like it requires a lot more skill than just patience. When you start getting hit and need to heal and desperately try and retaliate with a well-placed arrow, it creates this nice back and forth instead of that dreaded feeling of exasperation, like, oh sick, I just lost 90% of my health because I got hit once after I sat here doing 20 damage to this dumb robot every time I hit him in a weak spot, which I've been doing for the past 5 minutes only to chip down half of his health bar. I'm having a great time, what do you mean? The Slitherfang is the total opposite. It's a really exciting first boss for this game, and it's followed up by other bosses later on that continue that trend. 2 hours in, and I have something 5 times better than anything I got in 7 hours in Zero Dawn. Even better than that though, something that basically made me jump up and down seeing that it was fixed, was that there's far less canned interactions during the less epic and essential story moments or side quests where characters act like cardboard cutouts and feel like hollow shells of people. I am very, very, very glad that these are gone, or almost gone. There are still a few weird moments here and there, but it's leaps and bounds ahead of last time. Is the non-gameplay stuff still the worst thing about this franchise? Yeah, no question, but the issues are less egregious. Dialogue choices still exist, mainly to pry for more information, but sometimes to make emotional decisions, but the latter especially is reduced to only be used in moments where they'll matter instead of just sprinkled in everywhere for no reason. The way they're shot is also way more cinematic. This is a side-by-side comparison of 2 random conversations that I plucked out from either game, and you can see how much more movement there is here. There's also more nuance in the acting, both in terms of mocap and voice, like Aloy getting flustered here during this early conversation. While these more quiet moments gave me nothing, actually less than nothing in Zero Dawn, they made me actively care about characters less. Just the small, sweet interaction between these 2 early on in this game made me instantly love this dude, made me kinda invested in their potential relationship, and made me like Aloy more. A major gripe that I have with the writers of these games is that they can be pretty on the nose with how they portray the personality traits of their characters. I call it alley-oop writing. I'm sure there's a more technical term for it, but it's when a character awkwardly says something in a very unnatural way just for the sake of a different character, in this case usually Aloy, to respond to it in a manner that basically just screams, "This is my personality." You've probably noticed it a lot in these games. You can't take that thing out. It's too big. You'll be killed. Ha! Please, I am courageous. I will fight it head on and win. Notice my courageous tone and courageous words. I'll complain about it more later on, but it's very hard to connect to, and it was almost exclusively used in these interactions of lesser importance in Zero Dawn. Everyone felt like a robot with no personality, and I really hated it. But just this one moment built a bit of a deeper connection to Aloy's character for me, something that happened more than once over this game's runtime. And it's crazy that it comes from what was maybe my least favorite thing in the last game, the one-on-one character moments. She's still not the most interesting character, but these add some more elements of humanity, which is much needed. The early open world stuff isn't the most gripping, but it's certainly diverse, and this whole first area, which I explored for like 6 to 7 hours, I don't think I did the same thing twice. A lot of it isn't award worthy, but hey, they got me doing basically every single side quest early on, so there's something right there. I definitely noticed a rise in quality of the moment-to-moment gameplay once I hit this early open world section after the linear beginning, but it still didn't nearly reach the heights that it would once the embassy quest finished and the remainder of the world was open to be explored. But before I talk about that, let's talk about a few things that might give you a bad feeling of deja vu if you weren't a fan of the first game. Alright, so this section's gonna be mainly storytelling related stuff, so I'm gonna get anything else out of the way first. The side quest didn't really hit a stride until after the embassy. There are quite a few of them early on, and they have fine characters and premises, but most of the actual doing of the side quests feels like busy work. I know I just said that they did something right by making them diverse, but they also did something wrong by not making them all that fun early on. The enemy AI feels kind of random sometimes. Machines will notice you at times where it feels like they really shouldn't be able to notice you, and they have inconsistent aggression patterns, etc. I didn't find it too bad, but my brother had a real issue with it, so I thought it was worth mentioning. And the biggest non-storytelling issue is that the combat is so perfectly tuned for an open world game which imparts no restrictions on you that when you have any level of restriction, it feels worse, like noticeably worse. I bought this game, popped in the disc, and immediately felt Geurilla's hands on my shoulder, and I was like, Geurilla, what are you doing out of your cage? Get back in there, you big lug. And then I pressed start game and immediately felt Geurilla Games' hand on my shoulder, and it was far less pleasant. All of the linear, handcrafted sections feel really dull, which is not how I usually feel about linear sections in games. The controlled environment usually leads to better designed encounters, but here it always feels like some key ingredients are missing. And the small early open world section, like I said, is an improvement, but it's still not great because it only features 3 to 4 of the simpler enemy types. The combat enjoyment switch flips hard once you actually enter the Forbidden West. Okay, with that all out of the way, storytelling. There is some heavy expositionary dialogue in this game, especially at the beginning, and it's delivered with the hammiest of fists. No one in the beginning talks like they have a functioning brain. It's like they unhinge their jaw and just spout out the bullet notes that Geurilla wants you to remember from game 1. I would have much preferred just a regular recap disembodied from the character's forced dialogue compared to what we got. We have this very forced opening monologue from a character narrating as if he's explaining directly to us, then Aloy's recap of stuff that we haven't seen between the two games, and then the conversations between Aloy and Varl that somehow feel even more forced than the opening intro. Oh wow, I can't believe you ran off right after we defeated Schmelgermin in the Battle of Ooga Booga, where many brave men and women fought valiantly and laid down their lives in the last game, I mean a few months ago. I know, my mistake. I needed to hunt down something quite elusive, and therefore I've found myself here following many failed attempts at retrieving the object in other locations. Oh, that's okay, I forgive you. We are friends, you know, and you know my mommy, and we had lunch on the 4th day of the— Bro, shut up. Why are you guys talking like this? You guys remember how I talked about alley-oop writing? This is a prime example literally seconds into the game.
If it isn't Aloy, the savior of Meridian, anointed of the Nora.
You know I hate being called that stuff.
Well, consider it a punishment for running out on us the very same night we beat Hades.
I grew up an outcast. Remember, I'm not much for parties.
Wow, look at all the character work we did so fast. This writing stuff is easy, huh? This all should have been taken out because it's painfully awkward. Honestly, just give us a previously on Horizon Zero Dawn. Your recap doesn't need to feel this obtuse. This issue doesn't continue with the same vigor going forwards, but there's some crummy dialogue in spots, and it usually comes down to characters just spewing information at each other rather than actually talking with one another. Moving on slightly, there's one thing that I always had an issue with in Zero Dawn, and it's continued here, which is disappointing. The presentation has these tiny misalignments that break my immersion constantly, and for whatever reason, it really bothers me. I actually, surprisingly enough, had very little bugs during my playthrough, which I know is uncommon, though I will say that the bugs that I did get were crazy annoying, like NPCs refusing to continue down the quest path or not letting me interact with things until I reloaded an old save. But the misalignments that I'm talking about aren't bugs, they're just how the game is. They're things like the weird cuts where objects or people will take a frame or two to fly into place or pause their animation cycle half a second too early, which I know isn't a native problem to this franchise, it's just a thing that games have, but for some reason this is the only place where I kind of notice it and it annoys me. Other stuff also, long awkward pauses in between dialogue pop up frequently and they feel very inorganic. Aloy's hair is constantly flying around and clipping through her shoulder. There's tons of overdone facial animations that fall back into the other side of the realism line and look processed. If it wasn't for the fact that my brother played this game and had the same thoughts on these issues without any prompting from me, I would have thought I was crazy, because I don't feel like many people talk about this, and a lot lot of the time I'm just hearing, wow, the presentation of these games is amazing, but I do think there's a level of clunkiness in cutscenes at times in the Horizon franchise, and that's not fully gone here. It's weird because the issues are so minor in the grand scheme of things. Like, the game does look incredible in 99% of what it does, but there's just some underlying presentation jank that winds up mattering more than it seems it would. Finally, and I've heard this sentiment from other reviewers, but a lot of the story is filled with techno-babble or just regular babble, and I find myself zoning out of some big picture moments. I think in an RPG you gotta make your story revolve around characters and rely less on telling a technical story, cause you can't really pace it all that well or make the player feel connected to it when they're spending most of their time going out and messing around and talking to people. But unfortunately, Horizon uses its characters more for seasoning and flavor than for being emotional centerpieces for the narrative, which means, frankly, you care less. The story's not bad, and you'll be able to follow the main parts of it if you've just seen a quick recap of the first game, but it often gets lost in the nitty-gritty, which isn't great. So with all that said, the game clearly still has plenty of hitches, but if I was to sum up why Horizon Forbidden West captured me while Zero Dawn didn't in as succinct a way as possible, it'd have to be that while Forbidden West did carry over some of the same things that dragged down early portions of its predecessor, and it certainly put its worst foot forward once again, it showed me enough of the promise and potential in the game to keep me curious until it got really good. It wasn't just conceptually interesting, and it wasn't just a bunch of people online saying better things were to come. I could feel the imminently interesting future in the game itself. Certain things were holding it back, and I could feel that too. I was complaining to my brother a decent amount in the first 6 hours and hoping the game would get better and justify itself and its scores to me, and I definitely think that some people who didn't like the last game will continue not liking it, which is why I didn't make a big sweeping statement here. I tried to give as many facts and examples as I could so you can come to your own conclusion, but it gave me enough to believe in to hold me over until the real game started, and when that happens, Horizon Forbidden West finally gave me what I'd been wanting out of this franchise. Confirmation that the series was good outside of its interesting ideas. When you're let off the hook and allowed to explore the Forbidden West, it's something really special, and it's a testament to the game that in such a busy time, I didn't try to rush it or ignore side content, because everything past those opening moments was pure quality, and even only 20 hours in, I'd almost forgotten all the issues I had when it started. Reading through this script to record it actually felt kind of weird, because I wrote my initial thoughts and issues during the early hours, and when I went back to them, I just felt like they were so distant and unimportant. I will say that the main problem that continued for me was still the storytelling. It remained disconnected from the characters aside from brief moments and relied way too heavily on long explanations of the technology and the evil forces and the yada yada, with Aloy still not convincing me she's a very strong protagonist. She went from being an empty vessel from the last game to being somebody with just a bit of a flat personality here, aside from a few interesting sparks, which isn't exactly a glowing statement, but at least it's an improvement, I guess? I don't want to get too into the weeds of why I think this, because the video would go on forever, but if you were looking for Aloy to come into her own as a character here, just know she's like the epitome of a fine character in gaming. She's not good, she's not bad, she's fine. That narrative side of things is also the worst part of the side quest. None of this stuff is super memorable. I've already forgotten most of the people's names, and I'll probably only be able to recall a few plot points by the end of the year, but that by no means makes the side content bad. The side quests are lengthy and all pretty different from one another, some focusing on climbing and rescuing, others on infiltrating camps with a power-hungry leader, others end up with a single dangerous creature. The first time I fought a Thunderjaw was in a side quest, and it whooped my behind on hard difficulty. A lot of care was put into the structure and objectives of the quest, so from a gameplay and discovery perspective, they were pretty great. And it's those very things, gameplay and discovery, that carried this game so hard for me. All the issues that I had with the weird presentation moments or the overly technical story were washed away with the pure enjoyment factor of this game. The world is massive and gorgeous, and no two places feel the same. I would run by areas and find unbelievable looking creatures, each more advanced and deadly than the last, each unique in their patterns, weaknesses, and potential resources. It finally hit me that I was playing a game with freaking robot dinosaurs that you fight with a bow and arrow. It's crazy to me that it took so long to register how cool that actually was. The combat got so much better when I had absolute control over it, and I could be ambushed from the side or above if I wasn't careful and attracted another machine's attention. Just having to plan out my loadout for maximum elemental damage, going after specific machines in order to get new upgrades, gunning for it and snapping off parts that were giving me the most trouble during fights, sliding under enemies and hitting exposed weaknesses in their robo bellies, tearing off parts to use as weapons, it all clicked. It became something special, and I went from doubting that the series would ever hook me to being 100% 100% on board with this franchise. It doesn't reinvent the wheel or make any gigantic changes, but it does what a sequel should do. It continues to deliver what people loved from the first game, and it improves on itself enough to appeal to a whole new audience that may not have enjoyed the last one. It's not the game of the year, it's not even the best game of the last 10 days of February due to some unfortunate circumstances, but don't let that fool you into thinking this game isn't worth playing. I can't guarantee that you'll enjoy Forbidden West if you didn't like this franchise going in, but I do think that you should give it a shot when it hits a price point that you're more comfortable with, because even though I hated Horizon Zero Dawn, I kinda loved Forbidden West.